Francesca Sutton's crimson hair tumbled wildly over her face as she shook the iron bars of her cage, her knuckles white with fury against the thick metal that had imprisoned her for 3 days now. She wasn't a criminal, at least not in her own eyes, but the powerful men of Owyhee. Nevada territory had decided her rebellious words and actions were dangerous enough to warrant this humiliation in the town square during the sweltering summer of 1871. "You can't silence the truth," she shouted at the passers-by, many of whom quickly averted their eyes in shame or discomfort. "Women deserve the right to vote, to own property without a husband, to speak without being called hysterical." Her throat was raw from shouting, her once elegant blue dress now stained with dust and sweat. At 24 years of age, Francesca had already established herself as the most controversial woman in the small mining community. The daughter of a respected doctor who had died the previous year, she had inherited his practice but not his standing in the community. Instead of quietly selling the medical office as expected, she had attempted to continue her father's work, having secretly assisted him for years. That was only the first of her supposed transgressions. When the town council had rejected her petition to maintain her father's medical license, she'd organized a group of women to protest outside the town hall. When the local newspaper refused to publish her letters advocating for women's suffrage, she had started distributing her own pamphlets. But it was her final act interrupting the Independence Day celebration with a speech about the hypocrisy of celebrating freedom while denying it to half the population that had landed her in this cage. Sheriff Mullins had declared it would be a lesson in humility for the troublesome woman. 3 days of public shame ought to quiet her radical notions, he'd said. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Francesca sank to the wooden floor of the cage, her energy depleted. Water had been provided sparingly, food even less so. She closed her eyes against the brightness, wondering if her cause had been worth this degradation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until a shadow fell across her face. Francesca looked up, expecting to see another curious onlooker come to gawk at the wild woman of Owyhee. Instead, she saw a tall stranger atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was partially concealed by the brim of a dust-covered Stetson, but she could make out a strong jawline darkened by several days' worth of stubble. He wasn't dressed like the miners or businessmen of the town. His clothing was practical, a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, denim pants tucked into well-used boots, and a gun belt that had clearly seen its share of use. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was deep with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from the Nevada territory. "Do I look all right?" Francesca retorted, immediately regretting her sharp tone. This was the first person in 3 days who had addressed her as a human being rather than a spectacle. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the cage. Now she could see his face clearly tanned from the sun, with eyes the color of a summer storm. Not handsome in the conventional way, but striking, with features that suggested both strength and thoughtfulness. "Name's Gabriel Thornton," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "What's a lady like you doing locked up like this?" Francesca pushed her matted hair back from her face, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. "I had the audacity to suggest that women are people too. Quite the criminal offense in these parts." Gabriel's eyes narrowed as he studied the heavy padlock securing the cage door. "How long have you been in there?" 3 days. Sheriff says I'll stay until I've learned my lesson." A muscle in Gabriel's jaw twitched. "And what lesson would that be, madam?" "That women should be seen and not heard. Preferably just seen in a kitchen or nursery." Despite her exhaustion, the fire in her voice remained. Without another word, Gabriel walked to his horse and reached into his saddlebag, returning with a small leather case. He knelt by the padlock and removed several slender metal tools. "What are you doing?" Francesca whispered, glancing nervously toward the sheriff's office across the street. "Something I probably shouldn't," Gabriel replied, his fingers working deftly with the tools. "But I've never been much for seeing folks caged, especially not for speaking their mind." The lock clicked open after less than a minute of his skilled manipulation. "You're a thief," Francesca stated, not as an accusation but as a realization. Gabriel smiled slightly. "Among other things. Let's just say I've had occasion to learn certain skills in my line of work." He swung the cage door open and extended his hand. "Sheriff will be making his rounds soon. We don't have much time." Francesca hesitated. "If I leave with you, I'll never be able to return. They'll say I'm a fugitive." "Seems to me they've already decided what you are," Gabriel observed quietly. "Question is, do you want to spend your life in cages of their making, or take a chance on something else?" He looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Fly with me, Miss Sutton, Francesca Sutton. Fly with me, Miss Sutton. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I guarantee it'll be free." In that moment, weighing the life she knew against complete uncertainty with this stranger, Francesca made her decision. She placed her hand in his, noting the calluses that spoke of a life of hard work, despite his apparent skill with locks. "Where would we go?" she asked, allowing him to help her from the cage on legs weak from disuse. "I've got a place in mind," he said, leading her quickly toward his horse. "But first, we need distance between us and this town." Gabriel lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a circle that felt strangely protective despite its unfamiliarity. "Hold tight," he murmured close to her ear. And then they were moving, the horse's powerful strides carrying them down the main street of Owyhee. Someone shouted behind them, but Gabriel urged the horse faster. Francesca clutched the saddle horn, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration as buildings gave way to open country. The warm wind whipped her hair, and for the first time in days, she felt the sweet sensation of freedom. They rode hard for nearly an hour, putting miles between themselves and Owyhee, before Gabriel finally slowed the horse to a walk. They had entered a rocky canyon, where a small stream provided water for both horse and riders. As Gabriel helped her dismount, Francesca's legs buckled beneath her. He caught her easily, his hand strong and steady on her waist. "Sorry," she mumbled, embarrassed by her weakness. "I haven't eaten much lately." "No need to apologize," he said, helping her sit on a flat boulder near the stream. "Rest here. I've got some jerky and hardtack in my pack." While Gabriel tended to his horse, Francesca splashed cool water on her face and neck, trying to wash away some of the grime from her imprisonment. She studied her rescuer as he moved efficiently around the small camp he was setting up. There was something graceful about his movements despite his size and obvious strength. "Why did you help me?" she asked when he returned with food in a canteen. Gabriel settled beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Let's just say I've got no love for men who use their power to silence others." "That's not a complete answer," he smiled slightly. "No, it's not." He passed her some jerky. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will need time to adjust." Francesca took small bites of the tough dried meat, savoring the salt and protein. "Are you running from something, Mr. Thornton?" "Gabriel," he corrected. "And aren't we all, in some way?" "I wasn't. I was fighting." He studied her with new interest. "Tell me what happened. The real story, not the short version." As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in vibrant oranges and reds, Francesca told him about her father's practice, her secret education in medicine, and her growing frustration with the limitations placed on women. She explained her increasingly public protests and how the town's patience had finally run out. "They said I was inciting unrest among the more impressionable ladies of Owyhee," she concluded. "The cage was meant to make an example of me." Gabriel had listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "Your father taught you medicine?" "Yes, he believed women had the steadier hands and better instincts for healing." She sighed. "He was more progressive in his thinking than in his actions, though. He never publicly acknowledged my training. And now you can't practice openly. I couldn't even if I hadn't been imprisoned. No medical school will admit women, and no licensing board will certify us without formal education." Gabriel stood and added wood to the small fire he'd built. "What will you do now?" The question hung in the air between them. Francesca had been so focused on escape that she hadn't considered what would come after. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a little money saved. Perhaps I could go to California or back east, where there might be more opportunities for women." "I'm heading to Colorado," Gabriel said after a moment. "There's a small settlement in the mountains called Silverdale. It's grown up around a silver mine, but it's isolated enough that people tend to care more about capability than convention. They've got no doctor. Francesca looked up sharply. Are you suggesting... I'm suggesting you might find a place there where your skills would be valued above your gender. He shrugged. It's just a thought. Why would you help me get there? You don't know me. Gabriel poked at the fire with a stick. Maybe I'm tired of traveling alone. As darkness fell completely, they ate the rest of the simple meal in silence. Gabriel prepared a bedroll for Francesca near the fire and announced he would sleep on the other side of their small camp. We should reach the next town by midday tomorrow, he said. You'll need proper traveling clothes and supplies if you're coming to Colorado. I haven't agreed to that yet, Francesca reminded him. Gabriel nodded. Fair enough. Sleep on it. Either way, I'll see you safely to wherever you decide to go next. Exhausted from the events of the day, Francesca fell asleep almost immediately, despite the hard ground beneath her. Her last thought before drifting off was that for all his rough exterior, Gabriel Thornton had shown more genuine respect for her choices than any man she'd ever known. She woke before dawn to the smell of coffee brewing. Gabriel sat by a small fire, his profile outlined by the first hint of light on the eastern horizon. You talk in your sleep, he said by way of greeting, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. Francesca felt her cheeks warm. What did I say? Nothing compromising, he assured her with a slight smile. Mostly medical terms. You were treating someone. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I often dream about the patients I couldn't help. That seems to be the mark of a good doctor caring beyond what's required. They broke camp quickly, Gabriel efficiently packing their few supplies. As he helped her mount, Francesca made her decision. I'll go to Colorado with you, she said, at least to see if this Silverdale place could use my skills. Gabriel's expression remained neutral, but she noticed a relaxing around his eyes. Good. It's a long journey for a solo traveler. By mid-morning, they reached a small trading post where Gabriel purchased supplies. He also bought Francesca a set of practical clothes, a split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a cotton shirt. When she emerged from the back room of the store dressed in her new attire, Gabriel's eyes widened slightly before he quickly looked away. Better for riding, he commented, his voice gruff. The storekeeper's wife, a kindly woman named Mrs. Peterson, helped Francesca bundle her dirty dress. You take care now, traveling with a man like that, she whispered. Francesca glanced at Gabriel, who was settling their bill. What do you mean? Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice further. I recognize him. That's Gabriel Thornton. They call him the Ghost Rider in some parts. Works for the Pinkerton Detective Agency, or so they say. Tracks down wanted men. Francesca's surprise must have shown on her face because the older woman patted her arm. Don't worry yourself too much. He's got a reputation as a fair man. Just not someone you'd want to cross. This new information shifted Francesca's perspective as they continued their journey. A Pinkerton detective would explain his skill with locks and his comfort with traveling rough country. It also explained why he might have intervened on her behalf. Perhaps he had a personal code of justice that extended beyond his official duties. That evening, as they made camp near a small lake, Francesca decided to confront him directly. Were you going to tell me you're a Pinkerton agent? Gabriel looked up from the fire he was building, his expression wary. Who told you that? Mrs. Peterson at the trading post recognized you. He sighed and sat back on his heels. I was a Pinkerton. I'm not anymore. What happened? I disagreed with some of their methods. His tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. Francesca pushed anyway. Were you passing through Owyhee by chance, or were you there for a reason? Gabriel was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I was tracking someone, a man who robbed a bank in Carson City and killed 2 people in the process. Trail led to Owyhee. Did you find him? Yes. He was using the name Wilson, working as a clerk at the assayer's office. Gabriel's eyes met hers. I was about to make my move when I saw you in that cage. After I dealt with Wilson, I came back for you. Francesca processed this information. You risked your capture of a criminal to help me? Wilson wasn't going anywhere, and what they were doing to you wasn't right. He added more wood to the fire. Justice isn't just about following the letter of the law. Sometimes the law itself is wrong. His words resonated with her own beliefs, and Francesca felt a new kinship with this complex man. What happened to Wilson? He's tied up in the sheriff's jail with evidence of his crimes. Whether they do the right thing with him isn't my concern anymore. Gabriel stood and walked to the lake's edge, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. Francesca followed him, watching as he skimmed a flat stone across the water's surface. So, you're truly not a Pinkerton now? What will you do in Colorado? Gabriel threw another stone, this one bouncing 5 times before sinking. I've saved enough to buy some land. Thought I might try ranching. I grew up on a small farm in Texas before the war. The Civil War? Francesca realized she knew very little about his past. He nodded. Fought for the Union. Afterward, couldn't go back to farming. Too restless. His expression became distant. Pinkerton seemed like a good way to use the skills I'd learned. But it wasn't? It was, for a time. Gabriel turned to face her. Look, Francesca, I'm not a hero. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I try to follow my own moral compass, even when it costs me. The use of her given name sent an unexpected warmth through her. I think we have that in common, Gabriel. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Maybe we do. Their journey to Colorado took nearly 3 weeks, following trails through Nevada and Utah, before heading northeast into the Rocky Mountains. During that time, Francesca learned to ride properly, to make camp efficiently, and to hunt small game with the pistol Gabriel taught her to use. She also learned more about her traveling companion. Gabriel Thornton had indeed grown up on a small farm outside of Dallas, the son of a farmer who believed in education despite their humble circumstances. He had fought at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, experiences he spoke of rarely and with obvious pain. After the war, he had drifted west, eventually finding work with the Pinkerton Agency, tracking outlaws, and solving cases that local law enforcement couldn't handle. What made you leave them? Francesca asked one evening as they sat beside their campfire in a high mountain meadow filled with wildflowers. Gabriel was silent for a long moment. They wanted me to break a strike at a mining camp in Montana. The miners were protesting dangerous conditions after a collapse killed 12 men. Company didn't want to pay for proper shoring. His jaw tightened. Pinkertons were hired to intimidate the workers, force them back underground. I refused the assignment. That was brave. He shook his head. It was self-preservation. Couldn't have lived with myself otherwise. In turn, Francesca told him about growing up as the only child of a widowed doctor in Virginia. Her mother had died when she was just 5, and her father had raised her with books and learning, rather than dolls and sewing. He taught me to read medical texts when other girls were learning needlepoint, she said with a smile. When I was 16, he started letting me assist with simple procedures. By 20, I was diagnosing patients and prescribing treatments under his supervision. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was. He believed women's minds were equal to men's, though he was careful about expressing such views publicly. Her smile faded. After he died, I thought the town would accept me continuing his practice since I'd been doing the work alongside him for years. I was wrong. Gabriel studied her across the fire, his gray eyes reflecting the flames. You didn't back down, though? No, that's not in my nature. She laughed softly. As you might have noticed. I noticed, he said, his voice warm in a way that made her pulse quicken. As they traveled, a gradual shift occurred in their relationship. The careful distance Gabriel had maintained began to dissolve. His hand would linger when helping her mount or dismount. Their conversation stretched later into the evening. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. For her part, Francesca found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, principled man. His steadfast respect for her abilities and beliefs was unlike anything she had experienced, and though she was loath to admit it, even to herself, his physical presence affected her in ways both unfamiliar and exhilarating. One afternoon, as they forded a swift mountain stream, Francesca's horse stumbled on a slippery rock. Before she could regain her balance, she was thrown into the icy water. The current immediately seized her, tumbling her downstream as she gasped for breath. Gabriel was off his horse in an instant, diving into the water after her, his strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his chest as he fought the current to reach the shore. They collapsed on the rocky bank, both soaking and breathless. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries. "Just cold," she managed through chattering teeth, "and my pride is somewhat damaged." Relief washed over his features, followed by something deeper that made her heart race despite the chill. For a long moment, they stared at each other, his hands still resting on her shoulders, their faces close enough that she could feel his breath on her cheek. Then he seemed to remember himself, pulling back and standing quickly. "We need to get you warm and dry. There's a sheltered spot up ahead where we can make camp." Within the hour, Gabriel had built a roaring fire in the lee of a large boulder and set up their canvas shelter nearby. He insisted Francesca change into dry clothes while he remained outside, then did the same once she was settled by the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket. "Drink this," he said, handing her a tin cup with a generous pour of whiskey from his personal flask. "It'll warm you from the inside." Francesca took a sip, coughing slightly at the burn. "Thank you, for the drink and for the rescue." Gabriel shrugged, sitting beside her. "Couldn't let my traveling companion drown. Who'd keep me entertained with radical political ideas?" She smiled at his attempt at humor, but something in his eyes told her he was masking deeper emotions. "I'm serious, Gabriel. You've saved me twice now. And you've been teaching me field medicine every day since we left Nevada," he countered. "I'd say we're helping each other." The whiskey spread warmth through her body, relaxing muscles tensed from the cold water and the shock of nearly drowning. Perhaps it was this relaxation, or perhaps it was her brush with death, but Francesca found herself speaking thoughts she had kept private. "I've never met anyone like you," she said softly. "Most men either dismiss my ideas entirely or humor me like I'm a child playing at being grown. You actually listen?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "My mother was a lot like you, smart, stubborn, convinced the world could be better than it was." His voice held a note of sadness. "She died never seeing any of the changes she fought for. I'm sorry. Don't be. She lived true to herself. That's all any of us can do." He looked at her directly. "Like you're doing." Francesca felt a connection between them strengthen, like a rope pulling taut. "What about you? Are you living true to yourself?" "I'm trying to." His gaze dropped to her lips for a brief moment before returning to her eyes. "These past weeks have helped me remember who I want to be." The tension between them was palpable now, a living thing in the small space they shared. Francesca found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Gabriel stood abruptly, breaking the moment. "You should rest. We've got a long ride tomorrow if we want to reach Silverdale before nightfall." Disappointed but understanding his retreat, Francesca nodded. "Good night, Gabriel." "Good night, Francesca." As she settled into her bedroll that night, Francesca acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny for days. She was falling in love with Gabriel Thornton. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had never intended to lose her heart to anyone, convinced that romance would only distract from her professional ambitions. Yet, here she was, lying awake thinking about a man's smile, his hands, the way he said her name. The following day dawned clear and crisp, the autumn air carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. They rode in companionable silence through increasingly rugged terrain, climbing higher into the mountains until, in late afternoon, they crested a ridge that revealed a valley nestled between towering peaks. "Silverdale," Gabriel announced, gesturing to the collection of wooden buildings nestled alongside a rushing river. A large structure that could only be the mine entrance was visible on the opposite slope, and thin trails of smoke rose from numerous chimneys. "It's beautiful," Francesca breathed, taking in the spectacular setting. "And isolated," Gabriel added. "Winter comes early here and stays late. Town gets cut off for months sometimes." "Is that why they need a doctor so badly?" He nodded. "That and the mine. Dangerous work." As they descended into the valley, Francesca felt a curious mixture of anticipation and anxiety. This place could be a new beginning for her, a chance to practice medicine openly without the constraints of Owyhee society. But it was also unknown, and she would be alone, but for Gabriel. And how long would he stay? The town revealed itself to be larger than it had appeared from above, perhaps 300 souls, with a main street lined with businesses, and homes scattered up the hillsides. They drew curious stares as they rode down the center of town, though the looks were more welcoming than suspicious. Gabriel guided them to a two-story building with a sign identifying it as Moore's Boarding House. A plump, cheerful woman in her 50s greeted them on the porch. "Gabriel Thornton, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed. "When we got your letter saying you were finally coming to settle that land you bought, I could hardly believe it." "Hello, Mrs. Moore," Gabriel said, smiling warmly. "Good to see you again." "And who's this lovely young lady?" Mrs. Moore asked, turning her friendly gaze to Francesca. "This is Miss Francesca Sutton," Gabriel replied, "a doctor looking for a place to practice." Mrs. Moore's eyebrows shot up. "A lady doctor? Well, isn't that something? And aren't you just what this town needs?" She ushered them inside. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted from your journey. I've got rooms ready and a hot meal cooking." The boarding house was clean and comfortably furnished, with a large common room where several men sat reading newspapers or playing cards. All activity paused as they entered, curious eyes taking in the newcomers. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Moore announced, "this here's Gabriel Thornton, come to take up that ranch property he bought last year. And this is Miss Sutton, a doctor looking to set up practice in Silverdale." There was a moment of surprised silence, followed by a chorus of greetings. A tall man with a silver-streaked beard rose and approached them, extending his hand first to Gabriel, and then, without hesitation, to Francesca. "Thomas Jenkins, town council chairman and owner of the general store," he introduced himself. "We're mighty pleased to meet both of you, especially you, Miss Sutton. We lost our doctor to influenza last winter, and the nearest medical man is in Boulder City 2 days' hard ride in good weather." "Mr. Thornton mentioned your need," Francesca said. "I'd like to discuss establishing a practice here." Jenkins nodded enthusiastically. "The doctor's office is still set up, though it needs a good cleaning. We can talk terms whenever you're ready." The warm reception continued through dinner, as various townspeople stopped by to welcome them. No one seemed particularly shocked by the idea of a female physician, just grateful for any doctor at all. It was a stark contrast to Owyhee, and Francesca felt hope blossoming within her. After the meal, Gabriel suggested they take a walk to see more of the town. The evening was cool but pleasant, the western sky painted in spectacular shades of pink and gold as the sun set behind the mountains. "What do you think?" Gabriel asked as they strolled down the main street. "It seems promising," Francesca admitted. "They're certainly more open-minded than I expected." Frontier towns often are. Necessity trumps convention out here. They reached the edge of town where the valley opened up. Gabriel pointed to a distant rise where a small cabin was visible. "That's my land, 160 acres backing up to National Forest." Previous owners started building that cabin, but had to go back east due to family troubles. "It's a beautiful spot," Francesca said, struck by the peaceful setting. "Have you seen it up close yet?" "Just once, when I bought it." He glanced at her. "Would you like to ride out there tomorrow? I could use a medical opinion on whether it's habitable or needs to be torn down and rebuilt." She smiled at his transparent excuse. "I'd like that." As they turned back toward the boarding house, Gabriel cleared his throat. "Francesca, there's something I should tell you." The serious tone of his voice alarmed her. "What is it?" "Mrs. Moore assumes we're together." I didn't correct her because I thought it might be easier for your reputation if people believed you had traveled here with a suitor rather than just a man you'd met. Francesca considered this. Impropriety hadn't concerned her much since breaking out of a jail cell, but he wasn't wrong about the potential difficulties. "That was thoughtful of you," she said finally, "though I'm not sure how much my reputation matters at this point. It might if you plan to establish yourself as a doctor here." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to presume anything. If you'd prefer I correct the misunderstanding, I will." The realization that he was protecting her without trying to control her only increased her growing feelings for him. "No, let them think what they will for now. It's not entirely untrue anyway, is it?" His eyes met hers, searching. "What do you mean?" "We are together in a way, friends at the very least." She hesitated, then took a chance. "Perhaps more than that, if I'm not mistaken." Gabriel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read, but the intensity of his gaze was unmistakable. "You're not mistaken," he said softly. "But I didn't want to presume. You've had enough people trying to dictate your life." Francesca felt a surge of affection for this man who consistently prioritized her autonomy. "I appreciate that, but I'd also appreciate knowing how you feel." For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, uncharacteristic for someone usually so composed. "I admire you," he finally said. "Your courage, your conviction, your intelligence, and he paused, then continued more quietly, "I find myself thinking about you in ways that go well beyond admiration." The confession sent a thrill through her. "I have similar thoughts about you." A smile slowly spread across his face, transforming his usually serious features. "Is that right, Dr. Sutton?" "It is, Mr. Thornton." She smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in months. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, the distance between them charged with possibility. Then Gabriel offered his arm, and she took it, walking back to the boarding house in a silence that felt full of promise rather than awkwardness. The next morning, they rode out to Gabriel's property. The cabin proved to be sound, but in need of repairs, a broken window, a leaking roof, and floors that required sanding and refinishing. The single large room was sparsely furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame without a mattress. "It's not much," Gabriel said apologetically as they stood in the center of the space. "It has potential," Francesca countered, moving to the window that overlooked the valley. "And the view is spectacular. It'll take work to make it livable before winter." "I could help," she offered, turning back to him. "Between setting up my practice and assisting you here." Gabriel looked surprised. "You do that?" "Of course. That's what friends do, isn't it?" She emphasized the word friends with a smile that suggested she was open to more. He took a step closer. "Is that what we are? Friends?" Francesca felt her pulse quicken. "For now, though I'm open to renegotiating terms." Gabriel laughed, the sound filling the small cabin. "Are you always this direct, Dr. Sutton? I find it saves time." She took a step toward him, closing the distance between them. "Life is too short for unnecessary ambiguity." His expression sobered, though his eyes remained warm. "In that case, I should tell you directly that I'm falling in love with you. Have been since the moment you looked up at me from that cage with fire in your eyes, instead of defeat." The confession stole her breath. "Gabriel!" "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's fast, and we're still getting to know each other. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Francesca reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I believe I'm falling in love with you too," she said softly. "And yes, it's fast and perhaps foolish. But it feels more real than anything I've experienced before." Gabriel's hand came up to cover hers, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture was so tender, it made her heart ache. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Francesca responded by sliding her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened. His hands found her waist, drawing her closer until she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her own chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't expecting you," he murmured. "I came west looking for a fresh start, not thinking it would include falling for the most stubborn, brilliant woman I've ever met." Francesca smiled, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "And I never imagined my jailbreak would lead to this." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, discussing improvements to the cabin, and Francesca's plans for establishing her medical practice in town. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they sat on the cabin's small porch, Gabriel's arm around her shoulders. "Will you stay in Silverdale?" he asked, the question holding weight beyond the simple words. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I think I can build something here, something meaningful." "With me?" The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. Francesca turned to face him. "I'd like that very much, but Gabriel, I need you to understand something." She took a deep breath. "I won't give up my work. Being a doctor isn't just what I do, it's who I am." "I would never ask you to," he said firmly. "Your dedication to healing is part of what I love about you." The word love hung in the air between them, no longer hypothetical or future tense. It was real and present, as solid as the mountains surrounding them. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly, "for seeing me as I am." The next several weeks passed in a blur of activity. Francesca cleaned and reopened the doctor's office on Main Street, quickly establishing herself as a competent physician. Initially, some of the men in town were hesitant to consult a female doctor, but after she successfully treated a nasty mining injury that might have resulted in amputation elsewhere, even the most skeptical became patients. Meanwhile, Gabriel worked on making his cabin habitable, with frequent help from Francesca on her days off. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and spending evenings talking by the fire or walking under the stars. Their relationship deepened through shared work and quiet moments of connection. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the highest peaks, Gabriel invited Francesca to dinner at his newly renovated cabin. When she arrived, she found the table set with a proper cloth and candles, a stew simmering on the stove, and Gabriel looking uncharacteristically nervous. "What's the occasion?" she asked after he'd taken her coat and poured her a glass of wine. "No occasion," he said, though something in his manner suggested otherwise. "Just wanted to do something nice." The meal was delicious venison stew with vegetables from Mrs. Moore's garden and fresh bread from the town bakery. They talked easily, as they always did, but Francesca noticed Gabriel checking his pockets several times when he thought she wasn't looking. After they'd cleared the dishes, he suggested they sit by the fire. Once settled, he took her hand, his expression serious. "Francesca, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life," he began. "You've brought light and purpose back to me in ways I never expected." She squeezed his hand encouragingly. "You've done the same for me." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I carved this myself," he said, opening it to reveal a ring with a small but brilliant diamond. "It was my mother's." Francesca's heart thundered in her chest as Gabriel slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Francesca Sutton, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you, to support your work and your dreams as fiercely as I support you, to love you for exactly who you are, for as long as I live." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at this man who had freed her in more ways than one. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "yes, Gabriel Thornton, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her with all the passion that had been building between them for weeks. Later, as they sat wrapped in each other's arms watching the fire, Francesca marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from a cage in Owyhee to freedom in Silverdale, from isolation to love, from being silenced to finding her voice and her place. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been locked in that cage, we might never have met." "I've thought the same thing," he admitted, "though I'd still like to have a word with that sheriff." Francesca laughed. "Let it go. He did us a favor in the end." Their wedding took place on Christmas Day, with the entire town in attendance. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and red berries, and Mrs. Moore had outdone herself baking a 3-tiered cake. Francesca wore a deep green dress that complemented her red hair, which flowed freely down her back at Gabriel's request. Thomas Jenkins officiated, beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Gabriel kissed his bride, the cheers from the townspeople were deafening. The celebration continued at the town hall, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. As Gabriel led Francesca in a waltz, he whispered in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" "Very," she replied, "though I'll still be Dr. Sutton professionally." He grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They left the party amid good-natured teasing and made their way through the moonlit snow to their cabin. Gabriel insisted on carrying her across the threshold, setting her down gently in the warmth of their home. Later, as they lay tangled together in the stillness of night, Francesca traced the line of Gabriel's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Helping me escape that day?" Gabriel propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "Not for a single moment, Best decision I ever made. Even though it meant giving up your work as a Pinkerton, starting over completely, I was already leaving that life behind, he reminded her. But finding you gave me a reason to embrace the future instead of just running from the past. She smiled up at him. I'm glad you saw me that day. So am I. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. When I said fly with me, I never imagined we'd soar so high together. Spring came early to Silverdale that year. As the snow melted and wildflowers began to carpet the meadows, Francesca found herself busier than ever with her medical practice. A mild influenza outbreak kept her working long hours, though it was nothing like the deadly strain that had claimed the previous doctor's life. Gabriel's ranching venture was showing promise as well. He had acquired a small herd of cattle and 2 excellent breeding horses, with plans to expand in both directions. The townspeople had come to respect him, not just as Francesca's husband, but as a hard-working, fair-minded businessman who never hesitated to help a neighbor in need. On a warm afternoon in May, Gabriel surprised Francesca at her office, appearing with a picnic basket and a smile that never failed to make her heart skip. I've come to kidnap the town doctor, he announced. The most serious cases have been seen, and Mrs. Moore assures me you haven't eaten since breakfast. Francesca was about to protest, then realized how hungry she actually was. Kidnapping a doctor is a serious offense, Mr. Thornton, she said with mock severity. But I might be persuaded to come willingly for the right incentives. Fresh strawberries from the Widow Johnson's garden, he tempted, and that soft cheese you like from the general store. Sold, she declared, hanging up her apron. Let me just tell Mrs. Abernathy I'm stepping out. They rode to a scenic overlook above the town, where Gabriel spread a blanket beneath a flowering dogwood tree. The view was spectacular, the town below, the river winding through the valley, and the snow-capped peaks beyond. As they ate, Gabriel filled her in on his morning's work and the latest town gossip. Francesca listened contentedly, enjoying the rare break from her duties and the company of the man who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. I have news, she said when there was a lull in the conversation. Gabriel looked at her expectantly. Good news, I hope. I think so. She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed this moment in her mind. I'm going to need to train an assistant at the office, someone who can take over most of my duties in about 7 months. For a moment, Gabriel looked confused. Then understanding dawned on his face, his eyes widening. Are you saying... Francesca nodded, her smile breaking through. We're going to have a baby. The joy that transformed his features was everything she had hoped for. Gabriel gathered her into his arms with a whoop of delight, then immediately loosened his grip. Am I holding you too tight? Is that bad for the baby? He asked anxiously. Francesca laughed. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. You won't break me. He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back to look at her with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should we move your office into our home? I'm feeling well, just tired, she assured him. And no, I don't plan to change my practice arrangements until much closer to the birth. Women have been having babies while working for centuries, Gabriel. Not all women are frontier doctors, he pointed out, but his tone was proud rather than concerned. How long have you known? I've suspected for about 2 weeks, but I wanted to be certain before telling you. She took his hand. Are you happy about this? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed his palm gently against her still flat abdomen. A child. Our child. Part you, part me. Hopefully with your patience and my determination, she said with a smile. God help us if it's the other way around, Gabriel laughed. My stubbornness and your restless energy would be a fearsome combination. They spent the afternoon making plans, converting the small second room of their cabin into a nursery, discussing potential names, and dreaming about their child's future. Boy or girl, this child will grow up knowing they can be anything they want to be, Gabriel said firmly, just like their mother. Francesca leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. And they'll have your sense of justice and compassion, she added. Your strength. As summer ripened into autumn, Francesca's pregnancy progressed without complications. She continued her medical practice with only minor adjustments, though Gabriel insisted on driving her to and from town each day once the morning sickness passed and her condition became more visible. The town celebrated the news of their impending parenthood with gifts and advice, some welcome, some less so. Mrs. Moore took it upon herself to knit enough baby clothes for triplets, while Thomas Jenkins' wife organized the construction of a beautiful wooden cradle crafted by the town's best carpenter. By November, with the first snows returning to the mountains, Francesca had trained a capable young man named Michael as her assistant. The son of a midwife from Denver, he had some medical knowledge and proved to be a quick study, respectful of Francesca's expertise despite being nearly 10 years her senior. On a crisp morning, just before Thanksgiving, Francesca woke to the gentle pressure of Gabriel's hand on her rounded belly. The baby was particularly active, kicking vigorously against his palm. "Strong," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Like Mama." Francesca covered his hand with hers. "I was thinking it feels more like Papa's restlessness." He propped himself up to look at her in the pale dawn light filtering through the window. "Are you scared about the birth?" "A little," she admitted. "Even knowing what to expect medically doesn't completely remove the fear." "I wish I could do this part for you," she smiled. "No, you don't, but I appreciate the sentiment." Gabriel kissed her softly. "I love you, Francesca. More every day." "I love you too, both of you," she added, looking down at her swollen abdomen. The baby arrived during the worst blizzard of the season, 2 weeks earlier than expected. The snow was falling so heavily that Gabriel couldn't get Francesca into town to the medical office. Instead, Michael trudged through waist-deep drifts to reach their cabin, arriving just as her labor intensified. For 16 hours, Gabriel alternated between holding Francesca's hand and following Michael's calm instructions. Despite the circumstances, the young medical assistant proved remarkably capable, his midwife mother's training evident in his confident manner. As dawn broke on January 3, 1873, their son entered the world with a robust cry that seemed to challenge the howling storm outside. Gabriel, his face streaked with tears, cut the umbilical cord with trembling hands, then watched in awe as Michael placed the tiny red-faced infant on Francesca's chest. "He's perfect," Gabriel whispered, gently touching the wispy dark hair that covered his son's head. "He is," Francesca agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Hello, James Thomas Thornton." They had chosen the name months earlier, James for Gabriel's father, and Thomas for the town chairman who had welcomed them so warmly to Silverdale. Michael cleaned up efficiently, ensured both mother and baby were stable, then tactfully retreated to the main room of the cabin to give the new family privacy. "You were amazing," Gabriel told Francesca, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never seen anything so miraculous." She smiled tiredly. "It helps to have good support." She looked down at their son, now nursing contentedly. "He has your chin. And your determination. Did you hear that first cry? He's going to be as opinionated as his mother." When the storm finally broke 3 days later, news of James's birth spread quickly through town. Despite the still deep snow, visitors began arriving, bearing gifts and good wishes. Mrs. Moore appeared with enough food to last a week, declaring that new parents needed their strength and shouldn't be bothered with cooking. As spring returned to the valley, life settled into a new rhythm. Francesca gradually resumed her medical practice, sometimes bringing James with her when Gabriel was busy with the ranch. The baby became a familiar sight at the doctor's office, contentedly watching the world from a basket or, later, crawling on a quilt spread on the floor. By his first birthday, James was walking unsteadily and attempting to repeat every word he heard. His dark hair had Gabriel's slight wave, but his eyes were all Francesca's bright green and curious about everything. "He's going to be trouble," Gabriel predicted, as they watched their son methodically emptying a bookshelf one evening. "Look at that focus. He's got a plan." Francesca laughed. "He's exploring his world. That's what children do." "Is that what you called it when you were organizing protests in Owyhee?" She threw a cushion at him, which he caught easily. "I was slightly more sophisticated in my approach." "Only slightly," he teased, dodging another cushion. Their playful argument was interrupted by a knock at the door. Gabriel opened it to find Thomas Jenkins standing on the porch, his expression serious. "Evening, Gabriel, Francesca." Sorry to disturb you so late, but we've got a situation in town. Mining accident. 3 men trapped, several injured already pulled out. Michael sent me for the doctor." Francesca was already reaching for her medical bag. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Tunnel collapse. They're working to shore up the entrance now so rescuers can get to the trapped men." Gabriel was already pulling on his coat. "I'll hitch the wagon. You get what you need." Within minutes, they were headed to town, James bundled up and left in Mrs. Moore's capable hands. The mining operation was chaotic when they arrived, men shouting, lanterns bobbing in the darkness, the injured lying on improvised stretchers near the mine entrance. Michael was moving efficiently among the wounded, applying pressure bandages and directing the less injured men to help their colleagues. "Doctor," he called when he saw Francesca, relief evident in his voice, "we've got 4 with serious injuries here and 3 more still inside." For the next several hours, Francesca worked tirelessly, setting broken bones, suturing lacerations, and treating a case of severe crush injuries that ultimately required amputation. Gabriel assisted where he could, then joined the rescue effort, his strength and calm demeanor proving valuable in the crisis. By dawn, all the miners had been recovered, 2 alive, 1 dead. The survivors were stabilized, the deceased prepared for burial, and the exhausted rescue workers finally allowed to rest. As they drove home in the pale morning light, Francesca leaned against Gabriel's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For understanding. For not questioning when duty calls me away. Even in the middle of the night." He put his arm around her. "That's who you are, Francesca. A healer. It's one of the things I love most about you." She looked up at him. This man who had broken her out of a literal cage only to help her build a life of true freedom. "I never thought I could have this," she confessed. "A meaningful career and a family, a husband who sees me as an equal." "You deserve nothing less," Gabriel said simply. "Though I think I got the better end of our bargain." As they approached their cabin, the rising sun painted the mountains gold. James would be waking soon, ready for another day of exploration and discovery. Their home, once a broken-down shelter, now stood solid and welcoming on the hillside. Francesca thought back to that moment in Owyhee when Gabriel had opened the door of her cage and offered his hand. "Fly with me," he had said, and she had taken the greatest leap of faith in her life. Looking at him now, at the life they had built together, she knew it had been the right choice. They had flown higher than either could have imagined, and the journey was still unfolding before them, wild, unpredictable, and wonderfully free. 5 years later, the Thornton Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the area. Gabriel's careful management and forward-thinking approaches to cattle breeding had paid off, while Francesca's medical practice had expanded to include a small hospital wing funded by the mining company. James, now 6, had been joined by a sister, Elizabeth, who at 3 years old already showed signs of her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. The children thrived in the mountain environment, equally at home, helping with ranch chores, or accompanying Francesca on her less complicated medical rounds. On a sunny afternoon in June 1878, the family gathered on their expanded porch to celebrate Gabriel's 40th birthday. Friends from town mingled with neighboring ranchers, the atmosphere festive with good food, music, and laughter. As twilight approached, Gabriel found Francesca standing apart from the crowd, watching their children playing with the other youngsters on the lawn. "Penny for your thoughts, Dr. Thornton?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. She smiled up at him, the lines around her eyes now speaking of both laughter and the concentration of her work. "I was just thinking about how full our lives have become, how different from what I expected when I was sitting in that cage." Gabriel nodded. "I was just remembering that day. You looked at me like I was insane when I suggested breaking you out." "Insane, or possibly my only hope." She leaned into him. "I've never regretted going with you, not for a moment." "Even when I snore?" she laughed. "Well, perhaps for a few moments in the middle of the night." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Gabriel," Francesca said after a while, "I had a letter from Owyhee yesterday." He looked down at her in surprise. "From whom?" "A woman named Clara Wilson. She read about my work in a medical journal and wrote to say she remembered me from before." Francesca smiled slightly. Apparently, after I escaped, other women in town began speaking up more. They've formed a ladies' auxiliary that's pushing for changes in the town charter. Your rebellion had an impact even after you left, Gabriel observed. So it seems. Her expression grew thoughtful. She's asked me to come back and speak at their Independence Day gathering about women in medicine and the progress being made. Gabriel studied her face. Do you want to go? I've been thinking about it. She met his eyes. Would you come with me? Bring the children? I think I'd like them to see where our story began. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture as tender now as it had been when they first fell in love. I'd be honored to escort you back to Owyhee, Dr. Sutton, though I think Sheriff Mullins might not be thrilled to see us. Actually, according to Clara's letter, he was voted out of office 2 years ago. The new sheriff is a much more progressive man. All the better, Gabriel grinned. Though I admit I was looking forward to seeing his face when you walked into town, a free woman with a successful practice and family. Francesca laughed. That would have been satisfying. She grew serious again. Do you think it's a good idea? Going back? I think you should always face your past on your own terms, he said, and I think your story might inspire other women to find their voices. A month later, the Thornton family arrived in Owyhee by train, a luxury that hadn't existed when Francesca left. The town had grown considerably with several new buildings and businesses lining streets that were now properly paved. As they checked into the hotel, Francesca felt a strange mixture of anxiety and confidence. This place had once tried to silence her, to make her small. Now she returned on her own terms, a respected physician with published research, a loving family, and a life built on her own choices. The ladies' auxiliary had arranged for her to speak in the same town square where she had once been caged. The irony wasn't lost on Francesca as she stood at the podium, Gabriel and their children seated in the front row, facing a crowd that included many familiar faces along with newcomers. 7 years ago, I stood in this very square, she began, her voice strong and clear. Not as a speaker, but as a prisoner. My crime was believing that women deserved the same rights and opportunities as men. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many remembered the incident, though some looked uncomfortable at the reminder. I was told then that my ideas were dangerous, that a woman's place was defined by tradition and not by her own capabilities. I was locked in a cage to be made an example. She paused, her eyes finding Gabriel's supportive gaze. Instead, that cage became the doorway to my freedom. With the help of a brave man who believed in justice more than convention, I left Owyhee and found a community that valued my skills above my gender. I built a medical practice, a family, and a life that honors both my personal and professional calling. As she continued her speech, detailing advances in women's education and professional opportunities across the country, Francesca noticed Clara Wilson in the audience, nodding encouragingly. Beside her sat several other women who had once been too intimidated to publicly support Francesca's cause, but now wore buttons declaring equality for all. When she concluded to enthusiastic applause, several young women approached to ask questions about medical training and other professional paths. Gabriel managed the children, while Francesca spoke with each one, offering advice and encouragement. Later, as they walked through the town, James asked the question Francesca had been expecting. Mama, where was the cage they put you in? She exchanged a glance with Gabriel before answering. It stood right where I was speaking today. Sweetheart, the boy's face scrunched in confusion. But why would they put you in a cage? You help people get better. Sometimes people are afraid of change, Gabriel explained, lifting Elizabeth onto his shoulders. They want things to stay the way they've always been, even if those ways aren't fair to everyone. That's dumb, James declared with the simple logic of childhood. Francesca smiled. Yes, it is. But people can learn and grow. This town has changed since then. As if to prove her point, they encountered Sheriff Mullins himself outside the general store. The years had not been kind to him. His face was heavily lined, his once imposing frame now stooped and thin. He recognized Francesca immediately, his eyes widening in surprise. Dr. Sutton, he said stiffly, using her professional title. I heard you were back in town. Sheriff, she replied evenly. Or is it Mr. Mullins now, I understand? He nodded, his expression uncomfortable. Just Mullins these days. His eyes moved to Gabriel, recognition dawning. You're the fellow who broke her out. Gabriel inclined his head slightly. I prefer to think of it as liberating someone who was unjustly imprisoned. An awkward silence fell, broken when Elizabeth pointed at Mullins from her perch on Gabriel's shoulders. Papa, is he the bad man who put Mama in a cage? Francesca suppressed a smile at the former sheriff's mortified expression. Elizabeth, that's not polite, she admonished gently, though she made no effort to correct her daughter's assessment. Mullins cleared his throat. Your mother and I had our disagreements, he told Elizabeth. But times change. People too, sometimes. He looked back at Francesca. I hear you've done well for yourself, Doctor. Good for you. With that surprising concession, he tipped his hat and continued on his way. Did he just apologize? Gabriel asked incredulously as they watched him go. I believe that's as close as Charles Mullins will ever come to admitting he was wrong, Francesca said. I'll take it. Their final evening in Owyhee, after the children were asleep in the adjoining hotel room, Gabrielle and Francesca stood by the window overlooking the town square. How does it feel? Gabrielle asked. Being back here after everything? Francesca considered the question. Vindicating, she said finally. But also, I feel grateful. Grateful to the town that caged you? She turned to face him. No, grateful to you. For seeing me when I was at my lowest moment and still recognizing my worth. For offering me freedom without conditions. Gabriel drew her into his arms. You seized that freedom and built something remarkable with it. I just opened the door. You did more than that, she corrected softly. You showed me that a man could be a true partner, not a master. You helped me believe I could have both love and purpose. He smiled down at her, the lines around his eyes deepening. We've come a long way from fly with me, haven't we? Yes, she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. And we're still soaring. As they prepared to leave Owyhee the next morning, Francesca felt a sense of closure. The town that had once tried to silence her had instead set her on a path to a fuller voice, a more meaningful life, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing year. Gabriel helped the children onto the train, while Francesca took one last look at the town square. Where the cage had once stood, a group of young women had gathered, several holding copies of the speech she had delivered. They waved when they saw her looking, and she waved back, feeling a connection across time and circumstance. Ready? Gabriel asked, offering his hand. Francesca took it, squeezing gently. Ready? Together they boarded the train, their children chattering excitedly about returning to Silverdale, to the mountains and open spaces that had become their true home. As the whistle blew and the train lurched into motion, Francesca rested her head on Gabriel's shoulder, content in the knowledge that some cages, once broken, led not just to freedom but to flight, and that with the right companion, there were no limits to how high one could soar.